Today we have some very exciting recent news about the far side of the moon. We have a fascinating new study from Harvard, we're going to talk about moonquakes, and a whole bunch of other reasons why the moon is actually more dangerous than you might think. And we're starting things off with some news that actually just came out the other day. Possible hidden structures on the far side of the moon. How exciting is that, right? China's Chang'e 6 rover spotted these buried structures, and news about the study came out in the Journal of Geophysical Research, Planets, which stated the GPR sends electromagnetic pulses into the lunar interior and receives echoes from the subsurface layers. We use the high-frequency channel data to detect the structure of the upper 40 meters along the rover's path, primarily consisting of rock debris and soil. Through this investigation, we have discovered multiple layers in the upper 300 meters, which likely indicate a series of basalt eruptions that occurred billions of years ago. So basically, the moon may have looked very different billions of years ago, because it would have had volcanoes. That is pretty awesome, but this also goes to show that there could be other stuff below the surface of the moon, perhaps something more ominous than the remnants of billion-year-old volcanoes. And it looks like I'm not the only one wondering if there could be something lurking beneath the surface. On to the next point. A new paper by Harvard University's Human Flourishing program discussed the possibility of an alien base hidden inside the moon, and in this base, there could be a number of aircraft used to quickly transport the beings down to Earth in order to continue their research or whatever the hell else they could be doing. I mean, we've talked about this kind of thing plenty of times, but it's pretty interesting to see academics from Harvard discussing it. The purpose of this paper was to give a possible explanation for all the UAP sightings that seem to be cropping up more and more in recent years, and the idea that extraterrestrials could be closer to Earth than we may think, with a base hidden right on our very own moon. It definitely makes the increase in UFO or UAP sightings more understandable. Next, I want to discuss something else that was brought up in this paper, the term cryptoterrestrial. This part dives into exactly what type of being may be operating the UAPs and possibly living hidden among us on Earth or even on the moon. The paper discusses 4 theories. The first are what we call human cryptoterrestrials. This theory suggests that a technologically advanced ancient human civilization once existed, but was most likely wiped out by a disaster like a massive flood, but that some remnants of the civilization continue to survive in secret, living in stealth among us today. Then there's the hominid or theropod cryptoterrestrial theory, that a non-human terrestrial species evolved to become technologically advanced and chose to live in hiding, possibly underground. These could be ape-like hominid descendants, we're talking like Bigfoot, Sasquatch type creatures, or even, according to this paper, intelligent descendants of dinosaurs. That's pretty wild. The third is former extraterrestrial or extratemporal cryptoterrestrials. These would be your classic idea of aliens, beings that might have come to Earth from out in space. And lastly, this one gets really crazy, magical cryptoterrestrials, and this is exactly what it sounds like. Basically mystical or magical beings that exist on Earth but remained hidden from human view. Now, we often talk about the potential dangers of intelligent life out in space, but what about wildlife, particularly underwater? Now, I know what you're thinking, there is no water on the moon. Well, it turns out there might be, and before these potential waters are explored remotely with rovers, manned missions may be getting put on hold in order to avoid any potential dangers. The darkest spots on the moon are its poles, and a number of scientists do speculate that there could be water or ice in these areas that could be useful to manned missions in the future. Nick Estes is the Science Operations Manager for ShadowCam, which is a NASA instrument being used to map out the darker areas of the moon. Now, he thinks there may very well be water up there, and where there's water, there's often life. At least that's what we see here on Earth, so who knows what kind of creatures could be swimming around on the moon. There's not as much protection against space debris on the moon as there is on Earth. In fact, there really is none, and this is also quite a problem. Micrometeorites are tiny particles of rock and metal that zip through space, and even though they're small, they can cause damage when they collide with something because of how fast they move, sometimes at speeds of tens of thousands of miles per hour. Now on Earth, we're protected from these micrometeorites by our atmosphere. When they enter the atmosphere, they burn up and create what we see as shooting stars. But the moon doesn't have an atmosphere to provide this kind of protection. So micrometeorites hit the lunar surface directly. For astronauts and their equipment, this is a big deal. Imagine one of these things flying into a spacesuit. The impact could be strong enough to puncture it, and that wouldn't be good. They could also, of course, damage equipment, so having a lunar base set up isn't as easy as it might seem. Maybe that's why the aliens built theirs below the surface. In part 1, I discussed the possibility of astronauts contaminating places we visit, like the moon, or places we might visit, like Mars. But what about the opposite? Us possibly bringing something back to Earth from the moon. We've never done any prolonged missions up there, so who knows what kind of deadly pathogens could be lurking on the moon that are just invisible to the naked eye. When we think about deadly pathogens, we're usually talking about viruses, bacteria, or other microorganisms that can cause disease. On Earth, we've seen how dangerous these can be, but what about on the moon? Even though the moon isn't known to support life, there's still some concern about pathogens. First of all, who knows if germs brought from Earth could interact with the moon in some unexpected way and possibly even mutate. Then we bring that stuff back to Earth and have some problems. There could also be microorganisms already on the moon, and if they were to be brought back, we could have a deadly situation on our hands as well. Fortunately, NASA does have strict quarantine procedures for astronauts returning from space though, but you never know. Speaking of the moon getting you sick, let's talk about lunar hay fever. This was something astronauts described feeling on the Apollo missions. Lunar hay fever is a term used by astronauts to describe their reaction to lunar dust. When Apollo astronauts visited the moon, they found that the fine, powdery dust on the lunar surface could be a real problem. When astronauts return to their lunar module after a moonwalk, they often bring this dust in with them. The dust sticks to their suits, and because it's so fine and sharp, it gets into everything. Once inside the lunar module, the dust can become airborne and be inhaled. Now, we talked about this in part 1 already, but I didn't really get into the first-hand accounts of what this stuff can do and the effect it would have on their bodies. Astronauts reported symptoms similar to hay fever, sneezing, nasal congestion, sore throats, and even itchy eyes. This reaction was due to the dust being extremely coarse and abrasive. All these tiny little sharp particles caused physical irritation. Astronauts would often describe the inside of the spacecraft smelling like burnt gunpowder because of all the lunar dust. But lunar dust may be more than just an annoyance. Like, who knows what health risks there are when inhaling these particles over long periods of time. The dust is not only sharp, but it's very small, so it can get deep into the lungs and potentially linger there for a long time. Kim Priss, a pulmonary physiologist from the University of California, stated that, quote, particles 50 times smaller than a human hair can hang around for months inside your lungs. The longer the particle stays, the greater the chance for toxic effects. So that's a lot of fun. Astronauts also have to worry about moonquakes. These are exactly what they sound like. They're basically the moon's version of earthquakes. The moon doesn't have tectonic plates like Earth, but it still has quakes. They're just caused by different things. You have a few different categories of moonquakes. There are deep moonquakes. These occur about 500 to 750 miles below the surface and are actually caused by tidal forces from Earth's gravity, which is kind of cool. You have shallow moonquakes. These happen closer to the surface and can be much stronger. These are the most similar to the types of quakes we have here on Earth. These ones are the most concerning. Some have reached up to 5.7 on the Richter scale, and to put that into perspective, that's strong enough to cause damage to buildings if it were to happen on Earth. And obviously, Meteorite impacts will also cause tremors. So I probably don't really need to explain why moonquakes could be a problem for future crewed missions to the moon, especially more prolonged ones. It seems like the moon also just doesn't really like our company very much. It's slowly distancing itself from us day by day. It gets about 3.8 centimeters further away every year. Now, this may not be a reason as to why NASA hasn't been back to the place in decades, but it is sort of an unsettling fact about the moon. Now, 3.8 centimeters per year may not sound like very much, but over time it can have some significant effects. The moon's gravity is the main force behind Earth's tides. As the moon moves further away, its gravitational pull on Earth weakens. This means our tides will become less dramatic. High tides won't be as high, low tides won't be as low, which can and will have an effect on ecosystems on coastlines. The moon also helps stabilize Earth's axial tilt. This tilt is responsible for our seasons. Without the moon's help, Earth's tilt could vary more wildly, which would lead to extreme changes in climate and seasons and make our weather patterns even less predictable than they are now. And finally, we gotta talk about the big elephant in the room, that maybe NASA hasn't done another crewed mission to the moon in decades because we never even went in the first place. Yes, the whole moon landing was a hoax conspiracy. Now, personally, I don't think the moon landing was a hoax. I have more faith in humanity and our abilities, and I just find this conspiracy just kind of pessimistic. But it is a conspiracy that's talked about a lot, even in the comments of part 1, so I'm bringing it up now. The idea here is that, of course, it's pretty simple. The space race was in full swing. The Soviets and the USA were desperate to prove their technological superiority, but both being unable to make a moon landing happen, one country decided to head to a soundstage and fake the whole thing. Some even say Stanley Kubrick directed the moon landing footage himself. Well, with all that said, I've been your host, James, and I will catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.